Welcome everyone to this Let's Play of Kerbal Space Program Release 1.0. Now in today's episode we are going to complete a world first contract to orbit Kerbin, and this requires us to fly a vessel up and out of the atmosphere and then to accelerate blah 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 in order to achieve this goal. Now in order to achieve this goal we're going to take advantage of Jeb's good nature. Now Jeb also has a contract. He has a contract to test a prototype LV909 Terrier liquid engine. Now this is a very efficient engine, as Jeb has told us countless times, but this has to be activated on the staging sequence, through the staging sequence I should say, when all the test conditions are met, and that's landed at Kerbin. Now we're going to take advantage of Jeb by using his engine whilst it's in our workshop to complete our orbit of Kerbin, and then we'll test Jeb's contract. So let's accept the orbit Kerbin contract, let's accept Jeb's contract, and head on over to the VAB. Now in order to get into orbit we're going to create a very basic craft. We're going to start off with the Mark 1 pod. We are going to put, not science on it, we're going to put somewhere, we're going to put a parachute, there we go, parachute, Mark 16 parachute. Now, I'm only intending to complete the contracts as given, so I'm not going to worry too much about science in this case, but let's get our Kerbal engineering system so we know how things are going when we're in flight. We will get ourselves a heat shield. Put that on the bottom there. So that's our return vehicle. Now in order to complete the orbit we are going to take advantage, oh no, we're not going to put that on there. We're going to take advantage of Jeb's prototype engine. So let's put a separator on there. Let's alt click and create ourselves a double fuel tank, and then get the prototype LV909 Terrier engine and drop that on the bottom there. So that's going to be the vehicle we're going to use to orbit Kerbin, to actually get us into a stable orbit. Now next of course we're going to need our actual launch vehicle, and that is going to be a lot of brute force and ignorance. So let's alt click to create 2, alt click to create 4, and alt click to create 8. Now it would be nice if we had the longer tanks, but we don't. But we have upgraded our VAB so we can now take up to 255 parts, so this should be okay. Now as far as actually ascending, let's take the swivel engine. We'll check our thrust to weight ratio in a second, and that is going to be the top half of our ascent stage. Let's just make sure we've got our staging right so far. So that's that top stage there. Now 4.8 is barely enough to get us into a stable orbit, and I like to over-engineer where possible. So let's get a couple of these radial decouplers and a couple of hammer RT10s here for the bottom. Are they on? Yeah, they look like they are okay. Yeah, that's fine. Let's make sure again that we've got our staging right. So that's given us 5,190 delta V. That's going to be more than enough. So let's get our aerodynamics sorted. Let's get this standard size nose cone that we've used before. Give a little bit of aerodynamic effect to the top of those engines, and then just to keep us on the straight and narrow, let's get a couple of, or a set, not straight are they? Let's move these around one tick, there we go. So that should be good. So we've still got 5,147, but we've got way too much thrust to weight ratio on this first stage. So let's bring down the thrust limit until we're down to about, there we go, 2. There we are, so we're about 2. That should be perfect to get us off the platform. Now we're going to be balanced precariously on this swivel engine, which is going to prove a little bit awkward, but hopefully we should be okay. We don't yet have the launch stabilizers, so we haven't researched those yet. But as long as we're quick and there isn't a strong wind, that should all be good. So let's just recap. We have our staging set fine there. We then lose the solid fuel boosters. We will then keep thrusting on our one liquid fuel engine until we need to set our orbit. So let's save this. This is going to be the Orbit Mark 1. Let's save that and send Jeb into orbit. Okay, so here we are out on the launch pad. We are precariously balanced on our engine there, so let's get ourselves into space before this thing topples over. So Jeb is ready. Let's get the throttle up. Let's get the SAS on with the T key, and we are launched away. Now, first thing we've got to check for is our solid fuel, so let's keep an eye on that. Go straight up for the time being until that expires. Jeb is happy enough on his journey. Have a quick look back at mission control and the rest of the KSC there. We're going to have to do something about the runway. I'm going to be launching many aircraft from that dirt strip. So we're about to run out of solid fuel. There we go, so let those go. And now we are a little more flexible and mobile on our swivel engine. Let's start bringing that over. So let's drag that prograde marker towards the 90-degree mark on the nav ball, which is a pitch of 45 degrees east. So we're at 12 kilometers now. There we go. Pretty good on the 90. Ready for orbit. A little bit south, but that should be just fine. There we go. So let's keep an eye on our apoapsis. It's 32 kilometers now. There we go, 32 kilometers. And I think we will ascend pretty much until all of this fuel has been used. So I think that'll be probably perfect. About 80, 90 kilometer apoapsis. Let's keep an eye on this. There we go, 47. 54. Almost out of fuel. 65. We go 70 kilometers, so we will make it into space. And there we go, 87. So that's plenty. So let's now have a look at the map view, just focus on Kerbin. You'll notice our trajectory is grey. That's because we haven't upgraded mission control or the tracking center to allow us to use maneuver nodes yet. So we're going to have to do all this by eye. So what we're going to do is we're going to orientate our craft and use our engine to keep this at about 90 kilometers, thereabouts, so that we can get a roughly circular orbit around Kerbin, which is just enough to meet our contract. Let's just double check our contract. Obviously we can't do that one just yet, but we have got to orbit Kerbin. This is the one we are looking at. So there we go. We are now out of the atmosphere, so we can do some more science, in this case a crew report. So let's take that crew report and let's now begin our process of extending our orbit. So we want to keep that at roughly 90 without it disappearing too far over the horizon. We don't want an eccentric orbit, so let's just throttle up. It's coming down a little bit, so let's keep ourselves roughly at the same altitude. So it's all by hand, and we don't want this to be disappearing too far because we want to keep nice and level, thrusting half and half around either side of the prograde marker in order to get a roughly circular orbit. So, accelerating too far away. So let's just allow ourselves to approach apoapsis a little bit closer. Now if we had a maneuver node, we want to be executing it either side of apoapsis, so let's just cruise up a little bit closer. Not far to go. So let's get extending our orbit. And we can see it growing now. Should get our periapsis growing. Here we go. And when that flips round, there we go. 108 and 95. Not a perfect circle, but perfectly adequate. And as you can see, we have achieved our goal of orbiting Kerbin, and you don't even have to actually orbit Kerbin. As long as you have achieved what would be a stable orbit, you can pretty much come straight back down. So that's what we're going to do. So let's go back to our external camera view and have a look down on Kerbin as Jeb can now see it. So KSC disappearing over the horizon. So let's get ourselves turned around, ready to fire retrograde and come back down. Lovely view of Kerbal and the moon there. So let's take that as a picture for Gene's wall. So let's just print that. And again, there we go. And I think it's now about time for us to come home. So if we land somewhere here, then that might give us an opportunity to do some more science on the ground. So let's fire away. You can see the periapsis now dropping on the far side of the planet. And we're looking to land anywhere here. So the drag will bring us back as we enter the atmosphere. So let's hope we land around this nice river valley that's here. So see if we can land somewhere in here. No idea what biome that'll be, but let's find out, shall we? So let's just go back to our exterior camera view and get lined up on retrograde and accelerate time until we get into the atmosphere. And there we go. Hit the atmosphere and time warp's killed for us. So let's get ourselves ready on surface retrograde. And again then use physics time warp just to bring us in to land somewhere on this continent here. There we are, times 4. We'll keep going until we start to see some visual effects, which should be around here. And then we'll bring time warp back down. There we go. A little bit earlier. But let's make sure we're lined up retrograde. Use the experimental engine that Jeb's built as a little bit of a heat shield. See how it performs, shall we? So let's have a look at its temperature. It's up to almost 60 degrees now. Come down. There's that river valley there we saw from space. We're just going to be off to the north of that. Hopefully not landing in these mountains. But let's see, shall we? And I think we're going to go side on if we're not careful. A bit unstable. Just be getting through to the lower atmosphere shortly. Now, there we go. Starting just to get the standard atmospheric effects. There we go. So it looks like we're just going to go over these mountains. And whilst we are facing slightly sideways, let's get rid of the prototype engine. There we go. And pop the chute and see that disappear past us. Let's get rid of the SAS, and looks like we're going to land on these foothills just to one side of these mountains. Lovely river. Must try and get over there at some point. I wonder if that's a biome of its own. These river valleys. But let's see how we're doing with this mission. Let's keep concentrating on this mission. So that's 5 kilometers up, 4 kilometers above the surface, and there goes our orbital debris. Soon to lose that. There we go. Hopefully Jeb's got another one. So it's a bit rough here, but it should be fairly okay to land. Luckily we didn't land on the side of this hill here. Coming down pretty sharpish at the moment at 100 meters per second. Parachute opens. And there we go, 6 meters a second, that should be fine. And looks relatively flat. Maybe a slight slope, but nothing to worry about. So there we go. Jeb's coming down now. 28, 25, 15. Thump. There we go. Well, let's see where we are. Let's do an EVA report. And there we go. Get a nice close-up there of Jeb doing his EVA report. And he is flying over Kerbin's Highlands, which will take 5 science. So let's climb out of the cockpit with an F. There we go. Whoops. Right, there we go. Let's now do another EVA report here. Oh dear, we're going to have to take the flying one, get rid of the flying one. So let's do this EVA report for only 2.4 science. Never mind. So let's keep that data. So that's not been too bad. We have completed our contract here to orbit Kerbin. We achieved that goal by borrowing Jeb's LV-909 liquid engine. And although we have landed on Kerbin, we no longer have an engine to test. So that's going to prove a little bit difficult. So let's just take a few moments to have a look around, and then I'll see you back at KSC. Well, here we are for the mission summary back at KSC. We did gather a little bit of science, 17.4 science, bringing us up to a total of 69. We recovered just the capsule and its monopropellant fuel, and we got back 839 funds. We got plenty of funds now. And of course, we got Jebediah back, who's gained a further 1 experience point. No gain of reputation, but we do have 230 reputation all told. So let's just recap our successful mission. We orbited Kerbin. We got 68,000 funds for that completion, 12 science and 30 reputation. Now before we go, I really think we need to complete Jeb's prototype test. So let's go back into the VAB and do that. Now, completing prototype contracts is actually very, very simple, particularly when they test something on the launch pad. So we need to be landed at Kerbin. Now, of course, you could take this somewhere else, but it doesn't actually make any difference. In this case, we simply need to be landed at Kerbin. So we will have a Mark 1 command pod, and we will have our Terrier engine. We don't even need any fuel. We just need to activate it through staging. So let's just drop it on top of the pod and head on out to the launch pad to test it. So with this very unusual vehicle, let's just double check our contract. We need to be landed at Kerbin and we need to activate the part through staging. Well, that's very straightforward. Let's do that right now. And that's it. That's all there is to these test landed at Kerbin contracts. So we have now successfully tested Jeb's 909 Terrier engine. Of course, now that we've completed this contract, we're going to have to give the prototype part back, which is always a problem. So if you're looking forward to using some of these parts, then leave your test this part at Kerbin contract until right at the end, as we just did, in order to use that part in other missions. There's no limit to how you can use these parts in other missions if you want to, so long as the contract remains open and hasn't expired. So let's head on over to spend some of this science we've been gathering in the research and development facility. So here in research and development, we're now on to this fourth tier, which costs 45 science. So we've only got 70 science, so we can unlock one of these. So it could be advanced rocketry, which includes the prototype LV-909 engine we were just testing. General construction, which contains the strut connector, the ever useful strut connector, also known as space tape, and the launch stability enhancer, which for the small vehicles we're doing at the moment is not that useful, but for larger vehicles it certainly is. Next we have aviation, which includes our Weasley basic jet engine, and also for the first time we get some fixed landing gear with the basic aircraft parts. In previous versions you actually had to launch from a skid, but now we get some fixed landing gear. Finally, we could look at flight control, which contains the scriptable control system for KOS, the Reflectron DP10, which is our basic transmitter for the remote tech mod, and I've also included some smart parts, because one of the themes we want to try out in this Let's Play is automation, and these smart parts can take actions based on certain conditions. So in this case, an altimeter sensor based action. We also get the inline reaction wheel, which will give us a lot more stability to smaller craft, particularly probes. We already had the basic science, which included the orbital telescope, probe body and the thermometer. But I'm going to choose, rather surprisingly, aviation. And I'm going to keep you on tenterhooks as to why, because in the next episode we've got a surprise. But with that said, I'd like to thank you for watching, and I hope to see you again soon. Take care. Bye bye.